Wow. What an amazing, amazing time of worship there. And I do want to start off just telling you, I absolutely believe that. What a powerful name it is. It's one of the reasons why in third grade Sunday school with Evan Holloway, our spiritual goal for him, we always have spiritual goals for our kids in third grade Sunday school. And our spiritual goal for Evan Holloway is for him to just say the name of Jesus. And y'all, we came so close a couple months ago. He came in and there, like I do every week, I say to him, Evan, say the name of Jesus. Can you say Jesus? And he said something, and my wife Angie and Holly Mertens can say, it sounded just like he said Jesus. We were accepting it. We were like, yes, yes, but then we couldn't get him to repeat it. So I can hardly wait for him to get back. Be back in our Sunday school class, be back to the Evan that we know and love, and the Evan that is going to proclaim the name of Jesus one day and the miracle that God's doing in his life right now. So I'm just grateful for that and for that song. But this also, that song, and Randy and I didn't talk ahead of time, really fits into what we're going to talk about today. Because he has no rival, he has no equal, and nothing can stand against that. And in the story we're going to see in the scriptures today, we're going to see that David realized that. If you have your scriptures, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. And we're going to talk real today about the issues and the problems that we face in life. Because, you know, we all come to church and we all act like we got up early, we got ready, we had breakfast together while the birds were singing and our children were reading their Bibles at the breakfast table. We act like we didn't yell at the kids on the way here in the van, saying, sit down, hush, we're going to church now, look happy. We're acting like our wife didn't irritate us this morning, or our husbands didn't do the same thing he's done that still irritates us. We act like we have no problems. We act like everything's great. We act like none of us have children that are rebellious and are not walking with the Lord like we know they should. We act like none of us are dealing with addictions in our life. We act like everything's great. But you know, the reality is, it's not. We all have things like that. We all have estranged family members possibly and things like that. We're going to talk about that today, about the battles that we face in life. And when I think about that, I think about I'm a master. I don't say that I'm a master at many things. There's not many things. I like to say that I'm pretty medium at a lot of things that makes me look pretty good on some things. But really, I'm a master at one thing. I'm a master of great beginnings. Now, I'm not necessarily a master of great endings. Y'all, I have bookshelves full of half-read books. I don't know if the rest of y'all have those or not, or if they just come in my books. But I'll get in the middle of a book and I'll be reading, and it'll be great, and about halfway through it, I'll see another book somewhere, and I'm like, oh, that book looks good, and I start reading it, and 6 months later, I'm like, oh, I never finished that book. That still looks pretty good. But I'm on my third book by then, half read through. I'm also really good on my health journey of beginning diets, beginning new eating plans. Boy, I'm great at that. Man, I can do a diet for days. And then just one cheat meal won't hurt. And then, well, if I had one, I might as well do two. I'll start again next Monday. Do you know how many Mondays I've started a diet on? After I ate pizza buffet on Saturday or on Sunday, because I know tomorrow I'm starting a diet, so I got to get my last thing in. I'm a master of great beginnings. And it's because I don't keep my eye on the prize of the finished product. Y'all, we've got to do that. We're going to look at that today. Sometimes we have to keep our eyes on the prize of what's in front of us. What reminds me of this, and I think about it, is our daughter Cece. Now, I warned her I was going to tell this story today, and I was going to talk about this. She kind of rolled her eyes like a 14-year-old does, but she said, okay. But listen, we met our daughter Cece when she was 4.5 years old. We flew to Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, and we met this amazing little 4.5-year-old that had personality coming out everywhere, never met a stranger, had imagination, and we were like, she's an Anderson. We've met her. And we were so excited. And we told her then when we left, we'll be back. We've got to go back to America, but we'll be back in probably about 6 months to pick you up. We're praying that it'll be by December, by Christmas. And this was in August. Y'all, 3.5 years later, we finally got to go pick her up. It took 3.5 years to complete that process. Many times in that process, we stopped and thought, what are we doing? I mean, what's going on? But y'all, we knew that the prize at the end of that was having this amazing daughter. It even got harder the last week. Listen, the last week we were ready to go. We had everything planned. We were leaving on a Saturday. We were going to fly into the Congo. We were going to get there on Sunday. We were going to apply for her paperwork on Monday, which was all approved. We just had to go and make the application for it. And then we would stay there a couple days till we picked it up. And on Thursday, we'd get on the plane Thursday night to fly home. And we'd be back in Alexandria Friday night. It'd be wonderful. On Thursday, before that Saturday we were to leave, we got a phone call. And we got a notification from our State Department that they were shutting down Congo because of civil unrest. They were having riots in the street. There were people left dead in the street from the riots. It was a horrible situation. And they said, you can't go right now. We're evacuating the embassy families, the families of the embassy personnel. And you can't go in there. And we said, are you sure we can't go in there? They said, well, you can, but we can't promise you any protection. And if you get in trouble, the State Department's telling you up front, you're going to be on your own. I was like, okay. But we talked to everybody and we said, no, we can't do that. So we came up with an alternate plan. That was our first plan. That was plan B, that we were going to fly to Brussels, Belgium, because that's where the direct flights from the Congo connect into. And we would fly there on Monday, get there on Tuesday, spend Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday night, they would get on the flight in Belgium. And I told Angie, I said, if it breaks out again, I'm getting on a flight to Kinshasa. I'm going to get me a car, and I'm going to lay down in the back seat underneath a blanket. I'm going to drive to her house. I'm going to pick her up, and we're going to go to the airport, and we're going to take her home. And she said, okay. Y'all, it was like a Lifetime movie, except I wasn't going to agree to it unless Rob Lowe agreed to play me. Because the resemblance is so strong. But we got there, and so we went through Brussels one day on Wednesday, and then on Thursday we said, let's take the train out to Bruges, and we toured Bruges, a beautiful, beautiful city, and we toured that and saw amazing things. But while we're out, our phones weren't working. And so we came back that evening. It was that late afternoon, and we'd had dinner in Bruges and then got on the train back. And we came back to Brussels to our airport, to our hotel by the airport, and we got there. And as soon as we walked in and our phones connected to the internet, our phones blew up. And it was that they had got to the airport and they wouldn't let Cece and her escort fees leave Congo, because his visa wasn't for Europe, it was only for America, but he was only going as far as Europe because we were going to meet them and he was going to fly directly back. And so we were told that they had dropped her off and gone back to the house, and she wasn't getting on the plane that night. And we're like, oh, no, let's talk about this. And so we went through all kinds of things. Y'all, we were facing an obstacle that seemed insurmountable at the time. We had an amazing adoption worker here in America that she got on the phone to Fees back in the Congo, and she told him, you've got to at least try. He goes, oh, we can't make it. She goes, I don't care, you got to try. You've got to try. And so he did. He got back to the airport. We ended up redoing his ticket, booking him to come all the way to the United States, stay one night in a hotel in Washington, D.C., and fly back the next day to the Congo, but at least his visa was good to come to the United States. And we flew back, and we still made it back to Alexandria on that Friday night. Y'all, in the midst of all that, did we stop and think about all the things that were troubling us? Yes. But here's where the peace finally came over us in the middle of the night on Thursday, because we couldn't get a phone to say that they'd made it onto the plane. We were just hoping they'd made it on the plane. And then in the middle of the night, we got that picture of her on the plane with him, and they were flying to us in Brussels. Y'all, in the midst of that, we learned several things that we see come out in the David and Goliath story. So let's get to the David and Goliath story, and we're going to see what we saw in that and what David learned through that I think we can apply in any obstacle and any challenge that we face in our lives. The first thing we see is you've got to know who your enemy is. You've got to know who your enemy is. Look at me in the first 11 verses there of 1 Samuel. It says, the Philistines gathered their forces for war at Socoh in Judah, encamped between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. If I mispronounced that, I'm sorry. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley of Elah. Then they lined up in battle formation to face the Philistines. The Philistines were standing on one hill, and the Israelites were standing on another hill with a ravine between them. Then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet, 9 inches tall, and wore a bronze helmet and bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. There was bronze armor on his shins, and a bronze javelin was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of them. He stood and shouted to the Israelites' battle formations. "Why do you come out to line up in battle formation?" he asked them. "Am I not a Philistine? And are you not, am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose one of your men and have him come down against me. If he wins in a fight against me and kills me, we will be your servants. But if I win against him and kill him, then you will be our servants and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other." When Saul and all Israel heard these words from the Philistines, they lost their courage and were terrified. Y'all, the first thing in facing our problems is we have to know who our enemy is. We've got to know who we're fighting against. Y'all, our problems might be financial that we're facing. It might be a estranged family member. It might be a rebellious child. We've been through all of that in our lives. I'm sure most of you have too. Who knows what you're facing today? It might be a health problem. It might be the health problem of a family member. It might be a relationship problem. Who knows what you're facing today? But here's what you've got to realize. You've got to know who the real enemy is. The Israelite army saw the enemy, and the enemy was Goliath. Now listen, he was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. I don't think we realize how tall that really was. Have you ever seen someone that you know is tall, you know they're like 6'3" or 6'4", and you're like, man, they're tall, and then they stand next to an NBA player, and they look short? Listen, I'm 6 foot tall. Goliath was 9 feet, 9 inches. So he was me, plus another half of me, plus another 9 inches above that. This was a big dude. So he was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Not only that, he had armor on, bronze armor that weighed 125 pounds. Listen, my left leg weighs 125 pounds. And he's carrying the armor around like that. The dude is tall, he's strong. We know that because I couldn't carry 125 pounds around. Listen, if I go to the gym and I lift 125, I'm so proud of myself because I lifted it for half a second. But he's carrying it around like armor. Not only that, that's what he's wearing on his body. He then has this spear shaft, and the tip, I want you to get this, the tip of the spear, just the tip, was 15 pounds. Imagine what that looks like and what you're thinking. On top of that, he's taunting the Israel army. He said, "Am I not Saul of the Philistines? Are you not the Israelite army? Now come on. You've said all these things, now come on." And the Israelite army is like, "Oh, we don't want no part of that." And they're holding off. Y'all, that's how we do with our troubles. We look at them and we see what's going on, and we see this family member that we're estranged from. We see this child that's not doing what we know is best in the Lord's interest. We know that we might have health troubles. And we look at it, and in the moment, it looks like it's 9 feet, 9 inches tall. And it's carrying 125 pounds of armor and a 15-pound spearhead. When we see our problem, now listen, they might be big problems, they might be small problems. To me, some of the problems I face in life, and you're going to kind of wonder about this when you look at me, but I have food preferences. Now listen, I've been in ministry for 30 years. I've been to more, just like many of you, I've been to more potluck fellowships than you can imagine. Now here's the problem I have at potluck fellowships. I don't eat pie of any kind. Now don't tune out on me yet, I know. You want to give up on me. But I don't eat pie. I don't eat anything with a pie crust. So that leaves out cobbler, it leaves out all those kind of things. I don't eat fruit in food of any kind. If you mix fruit in my food, I'm done. Banana pudding's the only exception I'll make. I don't eat fruit in food. I don't eat nuts. Now, try to think of the last covered dish fellowship that you came to, potluck fellowship you came to. How many of those dishes had nuts and fruits in them? Oh, you take a Jell-O mold with fruit in it, I'm done. Now, I understand some of you love that. You can have it. You can have my piece. It's just not what I do. I'm a meat and potatoes kind of guy, just the basics. In fact, even crawfish, kind of. I love crawfish, I just don't like peeling it. Okay? So if I can get someone to sit next to me and peel it, and then I'll eat it, we can bless each other all day long. So invite me over, I'll do that. But I have all these things, and when I get into a situation, people will think, oh, what's he going to eat? Can I tell you something? If I could look at that and think, man, have I got troubles? But y'all, I don't have troubles. I have preferences. People have real troubles. We've had real troubles in our life. And can I tell you, in any obstacle that you're facing in life, who the real enemy is? The real enemy is anything that would stand between you and God's will for your life. That's the enemy. Your enemy is not your child that's struggling with addiction. That's not your enemy. Now listen, I've had a child struggle with addiction. And at times, it felt like he was our enemy. Because there were times that it felt like he was destroying our family. And we were like, okay, we're done. But we held on. Because we had to stop and realize he wasn't our enemy. He was as much in the battle as we were. He just wasn't fighting it yet. And so we had to stand there for him. We had to focus on, he's not my enemy. This is my enemy. The drugs, the alcohol, the whatever he was dealing with was my enemy. We may have an estranged family member. They're not your enemy. Whatever it is that stands between you is the enemy. You address that, and then that's taken care of. And that doesn't mean it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy. Listen, it wasn't going to be easy to fight Goliath. But we knew Goliath was the enemy. So you've got to understand who your enemy is. We've got to identify that, and we've got to stay focused on that. So once we've identified our enemy, they knew who the enemy was. Then we've got to know whose side we're on. Are we on the enemy side, or are we on God's side? Look at 1 Samuel 17, verses 20 through 26. 20 through 26 says, so David got up early in the morning. Now here's where we are. David is a shepherd boy still. His dad, Jesse, has him at home. All of his brothers have gone off to the war to fight. They've gone off to fight the Philistines. So they're all in the army. David's at home. Jesse says, I want to know what's going on with my kids. Hey, why don't you take them some food and go see them at the front and then come back and give me a report. So that's where we are. So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had charged him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry. Israel and the Philistines lined up in battle formation facing each other. David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. Remember that word ran. We're going to come back to that later. When he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. Now, y'all, when I read Scripture, I like to read it as if I was really there. Now, imagine this. You're an older brother. You're at the battlefront. And your little kid brother that wasn't old enough to be there, so got left back with the sheep, comes running up as you're going out there going, yeah, we're going to win, we're going to win. And he comes up behind you and goes, hey, what's going on? How are you? Like, get out of here. I mean, I can just imagine them doing that. So he ran up to the battle line. When he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. While he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words, which David heard. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated from him terrified. Previously, an Israelite man had declared, do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will make the man who kills him very rich and will give him his daughter. The king will also make the family of that man's father exempt from paying taxes in Israel. David spoke to the men who were standing with him, and he said, because you notice that said previously they've been told, so he said, what will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And here's one of my favorite verses in the Scriptures. David says, just who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God. Y'all think about that verse. Here's little David. The army has all been terrified every day. We know who the enemy is. The enemy is this humongous giant. And David's first response is, just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Y'all, David knew whose side he was on. Because every day for 40 days this had gone on and the Israelite army was afraid. Because here's what they'd forgotten. Think about it. The Israelite army, not in the too distant past, God had delivered them from slavery. He had fed them in the wilderness. He had brought them to the promised land. And then he had conquered the promised land for them. He had established them as a mighty nation. And now they're facing one man and they're running terrified. They forgot whose side they were on, but David didn't. David said, who is this that would defy the armies of the living God? Y'all, he knew whose side he was on in verse 26, where it says that, let me go find 26, where he says, David spoke to the men, he says that, who is this? He repeats it again in verse 45. If you look further down, he said, David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel, and you have defied him. Y'all, David knew whose side he was on. I think it was Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War that said one time that people said, oh, we need to pray that God would be on our side. And I believe it was him that said, it's not important that God be on our side. It's important that we're on his side. Y'all, so many oftentimes we face our difficulty, we face our problems in life, and we kind of look at them, and we just say, oh, God, come and help me in this problem. And God's like, I can't help you because you're not even on my side. Sometimes he needs to do a work in our life and bring us around. And so we've got to look at that. We've got to see, okay, where's God? What side is he on? And I've got to get on that God, on that side. And then once you know that you're on that side and you know who the enemy is, y'all, you got to remember, what's God brought you through? What has God brought you through? You know, even if you're young, God's brought you through a lot. Those of us that are older, we've got stories to tell. And every one of us in here can tell you something that God has brought us through. But can I tell you, even those of us that are older, even when God's brought us through things, we face a new obstacle, and sometimes we just go blank, and we forget that God's already delivered us from this, and from this, and from this, and from this, and from this in our life. And now we face this, and we're like, oh, well, he can't handle this one. This one's going to be the end of me. Not if God's got anything to say about it. Y'all, God's got it. You just got to get on his side. You got to figure out whose side you are on. What has God brought you through? Here's something God's brought me through that I thought about this, that God takes me back to often. When I was in elementary school, they put me in the special needs class. Not all the time, but I went as resource. And here's why they sent me there. It wasn't because I didn't know the work. Listen, I was one of those kids, and if you're a teacher, an elementary teacher especially, I apologize for kids like me. Because I was one of those kids that in second grade, I got straight A's and I got straight U's in conduct. It was tough, you know. The teacher said, well, he finishes his work and then he goes talk to people. And I've tried to move him around the class, but he'll talk to anybody. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. She moved me up by her desk. I talked to her. It didn't matter, I'm just here to have fun, Let's learn along the way, but let's go, But I had a speech impediment. I couldn't say anything that required putting your tongue up against the front of your teeth. And so they put me in special needs class, or this resource class for special needs. And that's fine. I was in there. I can't tell you how many times I said the phrase, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. It's burned in my brain. Only later did I find out it was part of a song. Because that was part of one of the things the therapist worked on with me. Well, I got to 7th grade, and they didn't have the resource classes in. All they had was the self-contained class. And so they wanted to put me in the self-contained class because they said, well, he's still not quite done with the lisp yet, and we need to get that out of him. He'll never be able to speak in public. My parents said, no, we're not going to do that. Now listen, my parents weren't how do I say this? They were wonderful parents, and I love my parents, but they were both alcoholics. Now they were functioning alcoholics, but they kind of struggled with some things sometimes, and it struggled with us. And so, can you imagine probably the reason they were an alcoholic was because of me, but but they worked on some things, but they did make one decision there. They said, no, put him in the regular class. And they did. Now, who would think that kid that they wanted to put in the self-contained class so that he could speak better would one day be speaking to all of you? And y'all, beyond that, next week, now, here's good news for you. I won't be here preaching next week, okay? You get a break from me. But because we're going to be going to New York, we leave next Saturday, and the weekend after, we get to spend the week there, and then the weekend after, there's a family that was in our ministry in Lake Charles that their daughter's getting married and wants us to do the wedding, wants me to do the wedding. And I get to perform a wedding in the cadet chapel at West Point. Y'all, who would think that kid that they wanted to put in the self-contained classroom because of his lisp would one day be leading a wedding at West Point in the cadet chapel? Y'all, it's only because of what God has done. But he's done all that for me, and then I come up against something like, a doorknob falls off the door at home, and I'm just like, the world is over. Okay? I forget what he's done. We can laugh at the Israelite army, but you know what? We're the same thing. We've got to remember who's the enemy and whose side are we on. And the third thing we have to remember is we have to know that we are ready. Verses 31 through 37, we see it says, what David said was overheard and reported to Saul. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul. So he had David brought to him. David said to Saul, don't let anyone be discouraged by him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. But Saul replied, you can't go fight this Philistine. You're just a youth, and he's been a warrior since he was young. David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. I love that. Your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. Then David said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. Y'all, we know who the enemy is. It's anything that keeps us from the will of God. Anything that gets between us and our relationship with God. We know whose side we're supposed to be on. Now we just have to know we're ready. We can do this. Everything in David's life had led up to this moment. Listen, God didn't have David kill a bear earlier just so he could kill Goliath. No, God took the things that had accumulated in David's life and used them in this moment. God has done a ton in your life, and he wants to use that. The pastor at First Baptist Nashville said a thing one time that I've never been able to get over. And here's what he said. God is preparing you for the place he has prepared for you. Y'all, God's preparing you for the place he has prepared for you. God's preparing a place for you. Now, ultimately, yes, God's preparing a place for us, and he's preparing us for that place now. But can I tell you, even in this life, when you face an obstacle in your life, God's already prepared you for that obstacle. God's got this. People will say, well, God will never give you anything that you can't handle. Y'all, that's not true. It's not biblical. God will give you all kinds of things you can't handle. That's why Jesus died on the cross. But here's the trick. It's knowing that it's Jesus that fights the battle. It's the Lord of armies that fights that battle. Sometimes we just need to step back and give it to him, even if it's just a doorknob falling off at home. Sometimes I have to step back and say, okay, take a breath. What difference will this make 200 years from now? The door's still open. It's okay. Now, how can I fix it? I've just got to stop and think, okay, who's the real enemy? That doorknob's not the enemy. The enemy in that situation is my attitude and letting it get the better of me and then spilling that out on my family. The doorknob's not the enemy. But when I realize that, and I go, okay, take my attitude back, then guess what? Then I can face the obstacle in front of me and say, okay, what do I need to do? Here's what I got to do. Got to go to Lowe's. I got to get this, and I got to fix this. Okay, now everything's back on track. Y'all, that's a little thing. But sometimes we got to do that with big things in our life. You are ready for whatever is coming your way. Think about all the things that God's already done in your life. Think about where he's brought you from. I think about that little gangly, goofy kid nerd. I was a nerd. I still am. And I think about that kid and where God's got him today. And y'all, I couldn't be more grateful. But I know that he's not done yet because I'm still breathing. He's got more planned for me and for you. We've just got to face it. So here's the conclusion. Here's what we learned from this. 2 simple words. Get going. Get going. Face whatever it is you need to face and get going. Let me give you 2 more verses here. Verse 48. Still in chapter 17, but verse 48. When the Philistines started to attack David, David ran quickly to the battle to meet the Philistine. Y'all, David ran. Now listen, if that Philistine, we got to remember how big he is. If he came up to me and said, all right, you're the one I'm going to fight. Now if I win, your entire nation is our slaves. If you win, our entire nation is your slaves. And I'm David. And that giant comes up against me. Would I run to fight him? I think I'd go, okay, Lord, let's talk about this one more time. Hold on a second, That's what I would do. But David ran to the battle. And then we see just a couple verses down there in verse 51, it says, David ran and stood over him. So David has hit him with the rock and knocked him down. And then he runs up to him, it says, David ran to him and finished the job. Now listen, if I was David, I would have walked up there, I would have crept up there, and I'd have poked him. Is he still awake? What's he doing? David ran to it because David remembered who the enemy really was. And he remembered whose side he was on. And he remembered that he was ready. David ran to the solution. Our hiding from whatever faces us doesn't do us any good. Whatever it is we're facing, family situations, health situations, money situations, school situations, whatever it might be, quit hiding from it and run to face it with the confidence that God is on your side and he is the God of angel armies.